Rare scenes of joy among Palestinians and Israelis after 15 months of genocide in Gaza. Prisoners are exchanged for captives, but Israeli soldiers stop Palestinians returning to northern Gaza. So what lies ahead? Hope or more problems? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finighan. The fragile and tense ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas finally bore fruit on Saturday. 200 Palestinian prisoners, some of them held in jail for decades, freed in exchange for 4 Israeli female soldiers. Delight among Palestinians mirrored in Israel when the 4 young women emerged from 15 months of captivity in Gaza. They survived as bombs dropped by their military colleagues fell all around, destroying much of the strip in Israel's genocide. However, no celebrations for thousands of Palestinians shot at and blocked by the Israeli army, preventing them returning to northern Gaza, another condition of the ceasefire agreement. Meanwhile, Israel attacks the West Bank, and US President Donald Trump talks about, in his words, cleaning out Gaza. So where does the ceasefire stand now, and what lies ahead? We'll discuss all of that with our guests shortly, but first a report from Uma Kulsum Sharif.
Celebrations in Gaza and Tel Aviv. Buses carrying Palestinian prisoners departed from an Israeli military prison in the occupied West Bank. Of the 200 released, 70 have been exiled abroad. Still wearing their prison uniforms, they were carried through by jubilant crowds in Ramallah. Mohammed al-Arida was among them. He was sentenced to life imprisonment in 2002 for being a part of a group affiliated with Hamas.
Many people want me to talk about what happened in Gaza. I say, and will always say, the earth will not bring to life a place as precious, full of dignity, brave, generous and loyal as Gaza.
There were joyful family reunions and people celebrated late into the night. Mohammed al-Arida's mother was among those who waited for his arrival.
Today can't be described. I couldn't believe that he was going to be released. Everyone was coming to me and showing me his picture, and I said, that's not Muhammad. Now when I saw him, I started to shout, my beloved son.
The release of the prisoners came shortly after Hamas freed 4 female Israeli soldiers on Saturday as part of a second swap under the ceasefire deal. They were flown to central Israel for medical checkups before being reunited with their families after 15 months in captivity.
I love you, all the citizens of the State of Israel who supported our families and embraced them, and all the soldiers who did everything for us.
The truce calls for Hamas to release 33 captives in a first phase lasting 6 weeks, with Israel freeing 30 prisoners for each civilian and 50 for each soldier. But Israel and Hamas are already accusing each other of breaking ceasefire rules. The release of an Israeli civilian by Hamas, meant to be freed along with 4 soldiers on Saturday, was delayed. And Israel stopped displaced Palestinian families from returning home in the north. Despite the celebrations on both sides, many people are concerned the ceasefire deal may not be fully implemented. Uma Kulsum Sharif, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests. From Doha, we're joined by Diana Buttu, a Palestinian lawyer and former legal advisor to the Palestinian Liberation Organization. From Tel Aviv, we're joined by Ori Goldberg, a political commentator and former academic specialising in Middle East studies. And from London, we're joined by Tahani Mustafa, a senior analyst on Palestine at the International Crisis Group. A warm welcome to you all. Diana, let's start with you. Where are we at right now in terms of the implementation of this ceasefire agreement? Israel has accused Hamas of not honouring it by not releasing Abel Yehud, a civilian, and Hamas says that Israel is violating the terms of the deal by refusing to let thousands of Palestinians return to their homes north of the Netzarim corridor. How dangerous a moment is this for the deal, and can we expect more of this sort of thing as each stage of the deal plays out?
Yes. The problem is that from the beginning, although it's listed that there should be people who are involved in monitoring this agreement, as is the case with every agreement that's ever signed by Israel, nobody ever oversees it. And so we end up getting into the point where Israel, being the more powerful, ends up dictating what the terms and conditions are going to be. And so we see today that while people were supposed to be returning to the north, back to what's left of their homes, that instead Israel is shooting at people, preventing them from getting to the north. And of course, the reason that this is happening is because at this juncture, there's a great deal of anger amongst Israel's coalition, particularly the right wing, that's saying that this is the worst deal ever. And they want to continue to see Netanyahu do everything to maintain the genocide. And he himself wants to continue to bomb Gaza. And so we see that he's going to be looking at any small thing to try to delay, to derail, to do anything to prevent the actual final ceasefire from taking shape. And here's, again, where it becomes so important for internationals to be involved, international actors to be involved. This shouldn't be the case where Palestinians are having to negotiate the end of their genocide with the very party that has committed genocide.
Ori, how concerned are you that this deal could collapse? Families of the remaining captives are demanding that the ceasefire deal be fully implemented and that all the captives are released. And yet we've got Finance Minister Smotrich claiming that Prime Minister Netanyahu wants to resume or continue the war on Gaza. Does he?
I don't think he does. I think there's been a slight shift in momentum, slight but substantial. I am cautiously optimistic that this deal will be carried out to completion, even though all Israel has left at this stage is obstruction and obfuscation. And the reason is that I think it has become less viable for Netanyahu to carry on with the genocide, which is the basic demand of the Israeli right wing, the Israeli religious right wing. I think Netanyahu now sees his best political hopes not in the settlers and the populists, but in the center that is actually protesting against him. I think he thinks that if an election is called in Israel over the next few months, there's a good chance these people might end up voting for him if he's capable of being seen as the man who could fight the war, but could also bring the quote-unquote peace.
Ori, what's going to happen once Israel gets all of the captives back? Is it going to say, well, we don't need this deal anymore, and it's back to business as usual?
You have to separate, you have to distinguish between different kinds of Israel. Netanyahu's Israel, which, by the way, may not be the same 6 weeks from now. He's ailing and alone and in the troubled coalition, may want to continue the war. Average Israelis who supported the genocide wholeheartedly, even if they did so quietly, they have tired of the genocide. They think the genocide didn't work. They don't want to see the genocide through, not because they care a fig for the plight of the Palestinians, but because they think Israel had a chance to reach a solution and the solution was not reached. This is a discourse that you hear repeatedly on Israeli social networks. There is agreement from just about every circle except the most diehard religious right that this war was fought badly and managed badly, and now this is all about a lack of professionalism. Netanyahu is a very, very smart politician. He knows this. He is Israel, despite Israeli protestations to the contrary. And I think he sees that shift, and that shift is a marked one if you live here. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. This isn't because Israelis have reneged on the genocide or think the genocide was wrong. They think the genocide was right. They think it was appropriate action. They just think we failed. So now it's a narrative of failed leadership, and it's a narrative of bringing about change, and it's a narrative of stopping the war and rebuilding. Israelis are now into living independently of Palestinian lives, whereas a month ago or 2 months ago, they definitely saw their livelihood as deeply connected to Palestinian death.
Okay, Tahani, I'll bring you in just a moment. Forgive me, I just want to go back to Diana and get another view from Ori about how much the current operation, Diana, in the West Bank is to do with Netanyahu's need to placate the extremists in his government.
Oh, definitely. And the fact that we're seeing that there are close to 900 checkpoints in this very small place, the fact that we see that the Israeli army is invading places like Jenin, the fact that they are going after and killing Palestinians. This is, on the one hand, while they stopped the genocide in the Gaza Strip after reaching an agreement, they're now taking it out on the West Bank. And this is, again, it shows the fact that unless Israel is stopped, it's going to continue full steam ahead. The problem is that the only way that Israel continues to behave is that it has to create this mindset of insecurity and this mindset that there are people that need to be defeated. The fact that they've seen that Palestinians are emerging from this genocide and are happy with the fact that prisoners are being released. This is something that the extreme right wing is pushing and saying that they must crush. And so hence they turn their sights to the West Bank and are doing in the West Bank precisely, but on a smaller scale, what they did in the Gaza Strip.
Ori, I saw you nodding in agreement there, at least some of what Diana had to say.
Yes, I think I agree with what Diana has to say, but I would like to add that the rift between the right wing, the settlers, and the greater majority of the Jewish population in Israel is growing. There are even voices within the settler camp who are saying we need to stop the war, not because we're wrong about fighting it, but because this is turning into our war. This is no longer a national war. We will be blamed for this failure when it wasn't even our failure. And I think that's an important point. I have no doubt that the quote-unquote operation in the West Bank is an attempt to appease the settlers. That's classic Netanyahu. He always plays both ends against the middle and tries to tell everybody what they want to hear. But the reality, the political reality, as I understand it in Israel, is not favorable to this agenda. Operations in the West Bank are something Israelis are used to. They're framed as counter-terrorist. They're seen as professional. They're not seen as political. But the Gaza genocide, the Gaza war, as Israelis think about it, is now seen as political. It's seen as sectorial, mostly because it failed. Nobody likes a failure. And most Israelis are now turning against the war. They're not really turning against Netanyahu. They're trying to find somebody to fault for the mismanagement of the war. That's the discourse you're hearing, as I said, a discourse of professionalism. And most Israelis, as far as they're concerned, they have moved on. Gaza, in a way, is over. They're not going to go back to Gaza, not to bomb, not to fight. Gaza is yesterday's news. Now we have to find a practical solution. When it comes to the genocide in Gaza, Israelis consider themselves now realists, as ridiculous as that sounds.
Tahani, I want to reflect on the jubilant scenes we saw in Ramallah on Saturday upon the return of some of the 200 people released from Israeli prisons, some of whom had been held without charge in administrative detention, some of whom spoke about being tortured and deprived of food and water since the October 7th attacks. To Palestinians, these men are heroes, aren't they?
Well, the prisoner issue represents some of the most odious manifestations of the occupation for Palestinians. And Hamas, as a resistance movement, has always stressed their commitment to free those prisoners. And I think we also have to consider that many of those prisoners that have been released and that are set to be released are held without trial. And those that do end up going to trial, these trials are held in a way that do not even meet the minimum standards of what would be considered to be an internationally fair standards of trial. So it's not about whether they're hailed as heroes. It's about the injustice that this really ultimately represents, what the prisoner issue represents.
human rights group Netzarim has documented dozens of cases of systemic abuse and widespread torture in Israeli jails, and says that at least 60 Palestinian prisoners have died in detention since October 7th, 2023, in what it says are jails that have become torture camps. Such is the scale of abuse that Netzarim says that it must now be considered state policy. Is it?
I mean, it absolutely is. I don't think there's any denying that there is a systematic policy in terms of the way that Israel conducts its sweeping mass arrest campaigns. Even now, during this hostage prisoner exchange deal, we're seeing Israel release as many prisoners as it is arresting in the West Bank. And in the same context of Gaza, in terms of the systematic abuses we were hearing. And this became a systematic policy that has been documented for decades. And certainly those practices haven't changed. They've definitely accelerated. But there is absolutely no denying that this is a blatant Israeli state policy, something that even Israeli politicians have come out and openly declared in Israeli media.
Diana, prisoners say that they've been subjected to regular, severe, arbitrary violence, including sexual assault. Other abuse, such as starvation, rations, and a denial of access to basic hygiene supplies was constant, they say. Will Israel, do you think, ever be held to account for its treatment of Palestinian prisoners?
One would hope so, but the track record is that will never happen. And the other frightening part about all of this, Adrian, is that nobody will be held to account even internally. In other words, this isn't just the question of whether Israel be held to international standards, but we've seen that this has become so commonplace inside Israel that when the allegations of rape were coming out earlier this past summer, there were people who were literally rioting in order to continue to be able to rape Palestinians who were held in Israeli prison camps. And so there is neither a reckoning internationally, nor is there a reckoning that's happening internally inside Israel either. So while I certainly hope that people would be held to account, the track record has been that nobody gets held to account for any of this. This is why we have this system that's lasted for more than half a century, 58 years now, of mass arrest, where people, nearly 1 out of every 2 men ends up spending time in an Israeli prison because of this revolving system of mass incarceration. And it ends up being the case that the only way that Palestinian prisoners, Palestinian captives are released is through this mass wave that ends up happening, either through the signing of an agreement or through these types of ceasefires. Here's the problem, is that unless that system gets broken, unless Israel sent a message that this is wrong, unfortunately, we're going to see this happen again and again.
Ori, going back to those scenes of jubilation in Ramallah, how are those being viewed in Israel? And the release of the 4 Israeli soldiers was accompanied by a show of considerable force or strength by Hamas. What impact has that had there in Israel and on Netanyahu, do you think?
Oh, Israelis find it infuriating. And in fact, Israeli prison authorities did their best to try and prevent any images of Palestinian celebrations from reaching Israeli eyes, resorting to ludicrous means like darkening bus windows and so on. But the ceremony, the handing over ceremony that took place in Palestine Square in Gaza, really infuriated Israelis. They used it as a platform to constantly discuss and, well, not discuss, but constantly repeat and drive home a point that seems self-evident in Israeli ears, which is that Israel enjoys such a vast moral superiority in comparison to Hamas that it's almost, unbelievable that Hamas allows itself to conduct its ceremonies, that this is psychological terrorism, that this is again and again and again an indication of what animals they are and how subhuman the entire Palestinian struggle as reflected by Hamas is. And in that context, I'd like to add to what Diana said, that the really horrid thing about the Israeli attitude, as far as I can understand it, from my vantage point here inside, is not so much the actual hatred or the desire for death or a bloodlust with regard to the Palestinians. The really horrible thing is the flippant indifference, is this notion that Palestinians are simply not there, and therefore anything that happens to them is completely irrelevant, beside the point, not meant to affect the state of affairs as they are in the field. I think that's the best way to describe the general state of affairs as far as the majority of Jewish Israeli society is concerned. Sure, there are those who would like to kill as many Palestinians as possible, but ask your average non-religious Israeli who defines him or herself as a centrist. If they want to kill Palestinians, they'll answer with an adamant negative. Of course we don't. We have no choice, but what are you going to do? That's the really horrible thing. That is the effect of the dehumanization that Diana described. This idea that Palestinians are there simply as objects for Jewish Israeli subjects to manipulate. That is the source of evil. That is what must be broken. And until it is broken, I don't think Israel will change in any significant way.
Tahani, what do you make of that? There are plenty of people who want to see this deal fail, but given the scenes of jubilation that we saw yesterday, do those, do you think, give greater momentum to the process, perhaps weaken the stance, the indifference that Ori was talking about?
Well, it's difficult to really expect it to sort of weaken that sort of indifference. I don't think there's been any indication to that effect. I think also the fact that you've, around this current prisoner hostage exchange deal, you also have Israel constantly shifting the milepost around the hostage exchange process, claiming that Hamas is breaking what had been agreed upon in order to continue to I guess, give itself discretion out of its obligations in this ceasefire deal in terms of the return to the north. Given that Israel's claiming that Hamas did not release one of the hostages that it claims was supposed to be released alongside the other four yesterday. So, I mean, it's really difficult to sort of see that shift in changing public attitudes, at least in Israel, where we're not really seeing that pressure, where Israel has continued since the start of this ceasefire to violate a lot of its obligations that were supposedly agreed upon. And again, going back to Diana's point about the fact that those that are meant to be guaranteeing that Israel sticks to its obligations have not done that in any way. In fact, if anything, they have also partaken in rescinding a lot of what Israel was allegedly to have agreed to.
Diana, let's get to President Trump. What are we to make of his comments aboard Air Force One on Saturday that he wants to see Jordan and Egypt accept more Palestinian refugees as Gaza is, quote, a demolition site, and that we should clear the whole thing out and say, it's over?
There's two things to say to that. First, how about letting them return back to their original homes, which were lands and homes that were taken over with the establishment of the State of Israel? 80% of Gaza's population are refugees, and they're refugees from the land that is right adjacent to Gaza. And so how about that as some sort of deal, instead of kind of trying to come up with a different space and place where they can go to Egypt or whatever? It's this idea that Palestinians are somehow pawns, and that we are people who are just going to be the recipients of any type of harm or damage. We're supposed to just simply accept it. But there's something else to say as well, which is that this is what the Biden administration had also been talking about very early on. Very early on, there were papers that were coming out from the White House talking about allocating funds to Egypt and elsewhere in order to, as they put it, relocate Palestinians. And at the time, when Palestinians were saying that this is ethnic cleansing, because that's what it is, everybody came out and said, no, this is, you're somehow, this is some sort of fantasy of yours. But it's clear that what it is that Israel wants to get rid of Palestinians, and they want Palestinian land. And the question is whether the world is going to stand up to Trump, or whether this is just they're going to allow him to view this as some sort of business deal or some sort of real estate deal. There is a history to Gaza. Gaza City is the largest Palestinian history. And this idea that somehow you can just erase it and build anew is very problematic. And instead, we should be thinking about actually the root cause of this, and that is letting Palestinians go back to their homes in what is current-day Israel.
Ori, was this Trump just freewheeling, talking off the top of his head, or is he somehow verbalizing Israeli objectives, as Diana hinted at there? Was there perhaps some side deal, do you think, that was agreed to get the ceasefire over the line before Trump's inauguration? Or does he genuinely, incredibly naively, think that Gazans are best served by being moved away from their land?
I don't think Trump cares about Gazans, and I don't think Trump has the stamina and the broad enough worldview to generate some kind of comprehensive deal, certainly not before his inauguration. I think he has exactly the right kind of tenacity and sort of a devil-may-care attitude, because he genuinely doesn't care, to help generate a ceasefire deal of the sort that we're seeing now. I think there's a general resemblance between Trump's MO and Israel's MO. And that is destroy first, no questions asked, as comprehensively as you can, and then try and throw all kinds of solutions up against the wall and see what sticks. I don't think there's a plan in place to remove Palestinians from their land. And again, as an Israeli, I think our settlers, our religious right certainly wants Gaza, but I think the majority of Israelis are not interested in Gaza and are not interested in empire. I think they're interested in seeing the Palestinians either gone or in full awareness of their place, which is having Palestinian neck under Israel's boots. That is an effective solution. Israelis thought we could do this with a genocide, but I think, again, for all the world to see, and I think Trump's behavior supports this assertion, the genocide has failed. Genocide in Gaza has failed. Israel is now without any sort of real option because Israel didn't care to prepare a real option before. The images that we saw today from Lebanon, Lebanese villagers chasing Israeli soldiers out, the thousands or tens of thousands who are poised to return to the ruins of their homes in northern Gaza, who are waiting for the okay. If they start to walk like the Lebanese villagers did, Israel has absolutely nothing to do. Okay. If Israel bombs them or begins to fire on them in systematic fashion, Israel will suffer the consequences. I can't make this point often enough. Israel is not triumphalist. Israel hasn't won. Nobody here feels as though something has been won. Israel is in a very bad way. Israel feels and understands that everything it set out to do has failed according to every benchmark it itself had set 15 months ago. We are now without options because we never took the effort to make them. So I think Trump, in a way, is very much Israeli in that sense. He has no idea what to do, and he's floating these ideas, not willy-nilly. I'm sure they were fed to him by advisors, but I don't see any chance that this thing will happen.
Tahani, I saw you nodding in agreement in places there. What do you have to say to that?
Israel's policy has always been to prevent permanency of Palestinian presence on the land, and we've seen that through various systematic measures that Israel has pursued over the decades. Arguably, what we saw in Gaza over the last 15 months has been an acceleration of Israel's policy to Gaza since 2007, which is to make it completely unlivable, and that's what it's done. It's invested a lot to effectively destroy Gaza, make it completely uninhabitable. It's very unlikely that it's going to allow for the resettlement and reconstruction of the Strip anytime soon. We're seeing that in the prevention of movement of people from the south to the north. This idea that Israel can't stop hordes of people from moving back to their homes. I mean, we've seen it. We've seen Israel violate the terms of the ceasefire deal since day one, where on the first day, we saw Israel shoot a 15-year-old boy who was returning to his home in Rafah. And just yesterday, we saw similar images of people trying to return to the north. So this idea of Israel wanting to effectively displace Palestinians from Gaza, that's something that Palestinians themselves, as well as regional states, were warning about since the beginning of this onslaught. Jordan itself went so far as to claim that any potential attempt would be considered a declaration of war. Palestinians had been anticipating, including those privy to these ceasefire negotiations since November, by the way, that potentially if we did see a ceasefire in Gaza, it would be at the cost of annexation. Okay,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're out of time. Many thanks indeed, Diana Buttu, Ori Goldberg, and Tahani Mustafa. Thank you for watching. Don't forget you can see the programme again at any time by going to the website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, why not join us at our Facebook page at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can join the conversation on X, our handle there, at AJ Inside Story from me, Adrian Finighan, and the team here in Doha. We'll see you again. Bye for now.